This is ThinkEnergy, the podcast that helps you better understand the fast-changing world of energy through conversations with game changers, industry leaders, and influencers. So join me, Dan Sege, and my co-host Rebecca Schwartz as we explore both traditional and unconventional facets of the energy industry. Hey everyone, welcome back. Do you remember what you wanted to be when you grew up? I remember I wanted to be in the arts, a photographer, or even a graphic designer. What about you, Rebecca?
Well, when I was really little, I wanted to be an architect because I liked to draw. And then a little bit later on, I wanted to be an actress. But as I got older, I realized I didn't quite have the skills for either of those. But honestly, there were so many careers I wasn't aware of growing up, careers that I didn't even know were possible.
In hindsight, I know there were careers that were considered unacceptable for me to want to pursue. You look back now and realize your career choices were heavily influenced by society's expectations based solely on your gender.
Gender is something that we've really only just begun to talk about and attempt to address in the last decade or so within the energy sector. And gender oppression, it brings up ideas about what's considered masculine and what's considered feminine, including the careers that we choose.
We've touched on this topic a few times in this podcast, but the energy sector is one of the least gender diverse industries, with women making up only 22% of workers.
And within the energy industry, which is expected to increase capacity by 50% by 2040, there is a huge demand for talented, skilled workers. There's an untapped potential pool of young girls and young women who can consider careers in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, also commonly known as STEM.
So here's today's big question. How do you reach 50% of the population that identifies as female to consider a career in the exciting energy sector, a sector that is going to shape and influence the future of our planet?
Joining us on the podcast today is Aaron Twamley, an award-winning book author and educator. Erin is a former energy education specialist at the Department of Energy, where she led energy literacy efforts for teachers and students.
Erin has been creating stories of women working in STEM careers through her Everyday Superhero book series. Her second book in the series was published in July 2022 and is designed to get elementary school children excited about careers in the energy field.
In her children's book, Everyday Superheroes, Women in Energy Careers, Erin represents 34 real-life superheroes and real-life women who are powering our planet today. They install solar panels, they dig wells miles into the ground, connect zigzagging power lines that charge our electronics, and drive us into the future with battery-powered cars.
The book series is smart, relatable, and inspiring, demonstrating the limitless possibility for girls in the next generation of STEM superheroes. Erin, welcome to the show.
Perhaps you could start us off, Erin, by telling us a little bit about your origin story and what inspired you to pursue a superhero career in energy yourself.
Well, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm very excited to talk a little bit about my career where I do kind of storytelling, right? I'm an educator. I'm a children's book author, and I really believe that the energy sector has lots of stories to tell, and there's lots of exciting things happening, whether you're climbing on top of a wind turbine or you're building a new kind of wind farm. There are so many opportunities for kids and even caregivers and adults out there to know about, because we are really on the cusp of changing how we power our planet, how we power our communities, how we power our everyday household items, from our cars to our houses to the airplanes that we fly on.
Erin, you mentioned that you were an energy education specialist at the Department of Energy. I think that was back in 2012 or 2016. What were you seeing in your role there, and how did it influence you in your career and your books?
So I worked at Department of Energy in the United States from about 2012 to 2016. And I was focused on this whole concept of energy literacy. So what do people know about the role of energy in their lives? But what do they also know about energy within a system, right? The way we consume energy, the way that energy is produced is not in a vacuum, right? There's economic systems, there's governmental policies that influence it. And so my time there was kind of spent really figuring out, how do we diversify the clean energy workforce? And how do we do that by starting with kids? So in that K through 12 space, we call it in the US, how do we talk to teachers and students? And I think what I really found there is that there were a ton of stories in the energy sector that weren't being shared with students and teachers. And so really my work at kind of Department of Energy focused on energy literacy drove me to then go into the private sector and just do that storytelling full time.
Okay, so your previous book, you focused on women in STEM. And your recent work is specifically focused on women in energy careers. Curious as to what made you zero in on the energy sector.
So I think energy is one of the topics that's really largely untouched in STEM. If you look at the education system, there's a lot of talk about coding, about robotics, about computer science, and there's not enough emphasis on something that we use every day, right? Electricity and our energy. And so this actually idea to focus on energy was actually a dream of my co-author and I, probably for the last 7 years. It's been on our mind that we wanted to focus on who are the women in energy. And it just took us some time to figure out the right partners, the right sponsors, and also I think the right time globally to be able to talk about clean energy and tell stories of those who are working in the clean energy space.
Now, women represent only 22% of workers in all energy jobs. Why are they so underrepresented?
So that question, I think a lot of people in the field are trying to answer, people in industry are trying to answer, and women themselves are trying to answer, right? And I don't think that there's kind of one problem or one solution, if that makes sense. But from my perspective as a storyteller, I think what's happening is that young girls and young women and professionals don't see themselves in these energy careers because they don't see role models who look like them. They don't know how expansive these energy career opportunities are, right? If you look at the traditional oil and gas sector, there was this whole stigma that these jobs are dirty, right? That they're outdoors, that they require heavy lifting, right? And so that energy sector had to go through a movement itself, right? To reshare what is happening in oil and gas. Same with clean energy. There are folks thinking that you need to be able to climb to the top of a wind turbine, for example, or that you need to be an engineer and have a PhD level type education. So I think for more women's participation, we need to share the stories about what those careers are. They need to see that women are working in these different energy careers and that these careers are from the offices to laboratories to industry and working in the fields. There's a wide variety of jobs within the energy sector.
Okay, here's a follow-up question for you, Erin. What are some of the most influential data points that stood out for you in your work or research?
So as a writer, I often focus on reading as a whole. And so I think there's 3 data points that I always love to share is that number 1 is until students reach the age of 12, one of the biggest influences on youth perspective and their outcomes is their family and their reading. So that connection between reading and what they read actually makes a really big impact on not only their interest in school, but what they might do as an extracurricular activity. So whether they choose that robotics after school program or not, for example. I think the second piece that's important, because I think we often underestimate this, is that exposure to role models at an early age actually increases both the confidence and interest, especially for young girls. And by a young age, I'm talking elementary school students. So that by bringing in a wide variety of professionals for career day, for example, that are outside of just veterinarian utility provider or an engineer, and expanding that exposure actually has an influence. It has an impact, and that is researched and proven. And last but not least, if there's any educators that are listening to this, I think educators have an important role in this space, because what you decorate your classroom with, literally the posters that are used, who's depicted in the classroom, and what books are sitting on your shelf, impact your students and whether or not they see themselves in these type of careers, whether it be STEM careers or energy careers. So something as simple as having everyday role models or women on your posters in your classroom, again, can make such a big impact on kids feeling like they're included and feeling like there's a future for them and opportunities for them in these different career paths.
Now, Erin, with your beautiful new book, which you co-authored, what's your goal by telling these real-life stories to children? And did you find support for the project easily?
So we focus on what we call everyday superheroes. So these are real women that are working in industry. In this particular book, they're working in the energy industry. And we wanted them to be everyday women. We wanted kids to think about their aunts, their uncles, their cousins, their moms, their dads, their teachers, and say, oh, hey, actually, my aunt is a nuclear engineer. I never knew what she did before, but now I can actually have a conversation and ask a question. Or, mom and dad, I didn't know you could put solar panels on a house. How cool would it be to get solar panels on our house? Is that an option? So I think the goal of these real life stories is to really help kids make a connection, right, to the energy that's around them in their lives. And sometimes that's clearly visible to them. They just need help making that connection. And support for this project has been overwhelming. I'll be honest. We've been very excited to both have industry partners, to have two of the leading energy education organizations in the United States that provide training for both students and teachers be our partners on this effort. And we have a new partnership that we're going to be working with our after school programs across the United States to make sure that this education not only happens from a book and a reading perspective, but there's some actual hands-on activities that can supplement students' interests and also hopefully spark their interest in getting into energy.
Okay, so though it's not a one size fits all, the book is aimed at children in grades 3 to 6. Why that age group specifically?
So I think what happens, especially in energy, is that we target middle school and above. And I hate to say it, but by the time kids are in second grade, they're already making decisions about whether or not they like STEM, whether or not they have interest. They're already talking about their competence levels in STEM and energy careers. And so the research and the data just shows, as I shared earlier, the earlier the exposure, the better the outcome. And so this is kind of a sweet target range, because elementary teachers get sometimes some more flexibility in the United States to talk about different topics or to expand on different topics. And we really believe that if we can reach kids at these age, we can hopefully build their confidence when they make choices about what STEM electives they do after school, or what clubs they participate in, or what classes they take part in during school.
For our listeners, perhaps you can talk about what kind of career field you focus on in your latest book, or maybe share some cool stories about the women you spotlight.
So what's great about the book, Everyday Superheroes, Women in Energy Careers, and that's the full name, because I think we've danced around it a little bit today, is that there are 34 superheroes and about 20 other women's stories we share. And these are women from technicians to installers to researchers at some of our U.S. national laboratories, to CEOs who are running companies like manufacturing companies that create pistons. We've got finance managers. We've got land managers. If you think about building a wind or a solar farm, that takes a lot of land, that takes a lot of investment. And there's an entire teams helping these energy projects happen. There are two women in particular I thought I would highlight today. One is Mackenzie Gillen, who works for Hydro One. She's actually an apprentice power line technician. She's part of Women Power Line Technicians in Canada. And she's, I think, somebody that's important to know, because this pathway is sometimes seen only from the perspective of you see someone climbing a power line or you see someone digging, but you're not really sure what they're doing or how important they are until after a storm, for example. But the power line technicians are the people who really keep our electricity flowing in our communities, right? They are the first ones when the power goes out or there's a potential for a power outage. And Mackenzie, what's awesome about her is that not only can she, string power line wires, but she drives a digger, for example. When she was a student, she had ADHD. So she knew that she wanted something that could be hands-on and where she could be outdoors, and that this job opportunity allows her to be successful and do that. Another woman I want to highlight is a civil engineer at First Light Power, which crosses actually a few states in New England of the United States. She works on dams. In fact, she oversees about 12 dams on 5 different rivers. And one of those dams is 115 years old. So imagine that you're an engineer responsible for not only kind of the safety of that dam, but making sure that it's in operation, that it's being inspected. And her name is Becky Stebbins. And so sharing a little bit about what she does on a daily basis is important for kids so that they can understand, well, how do dams work? How are they operated? And who operates them? So those are just two women that I wanted to share with you today.
In your book, you talk about the STEM superpowers that kids can develop to become STEM and energy superheroes. Can you talk to these and why they were so important to include?
So there's a lot of discussion, I think, especially in workforce development initiatives and in industry. What skills do students need, right? How do we prepare them for the workforce? And I think oftentimes there's a focus on technical skills, right? On what does a power line technician specifically need to know? What does a civil engineer specifically need to know? But these superpowers kind of touch a little bit more broadly on skills like observation, collaboration, communication, problem solving. And these are really superpowers that we believe any superhero should have. And a superpower can be developed, can grow over time, might be used, in one area of the job versus another. So these superpowers are kind of just a way for kids to get to think about themselves and what skills they already have and what skills they want to grow or learn more about. And it's a great way, I think, to engage kids in talking about skills, because we as adults use that term, but what kid wouldn't love learning about superpowers and cultivating their own superpowers?
Now, Erin, there is clearly a strong educational component with this book. How are you getting it into the hands of educators, and are you supporting teachers in any other ways?
So I, along with my co-author, Josh, we're both teachers by training, right? We have another co-author, Katie Maynard. And so together with our partners, what we have really done is worked to get this book into teachers' hands through 2 organizations, one called KidWind and one called the Need Project. And both of these nonprofit organizations in the United States, they train teachers on how to teach about energy. So we're partnered with them to make sure that we can get these books direct into teachers' hands that are already teaching about energy. And then we've got some awesome industry partners. And these industry partners are also helping us to distribute books to their local schools, to their local libraries, as well as these fabulous superheroes in the book. Many of them are buying copies of the book for friends, for family, for Girl Scout troops, for libraries, for schools. But it's important to note that teachers also work in after school programs. And so that's the other kind of group that we want to reach, are teachers that might be providing kind of supplemental or informal education. And so we have a partnership with the After School Alliance, across the United States to reach those teachers. And I know I'm talking a lot about the US because that's primarily been our focus right now, but we do expect that we can go global and that we can provide this resource to other industry partners and teachers in other countries. Especially, we've seen a huge push to translate this book into Spanish. So that is something we are working on with our publisher.
Here's a follow-up question. Maybe you can expand on this a bit. I read that you have sponsors and partners helping to distribute your book to more than 10,000 kids. Can you talk a bit about this initiative and why it's important to you?
So as an educator, I think I knew and my co-author knew we're always looking for new resources, right? We're always looking for new role models. We're looking for things to kind of supplement curriculum, right? This book is not curriculum. It's really meant to spark kids asking questions. It's meant to get them thinking about careers and just providing role models. So we knew we needed industry partners because they're the leaders, right? They're the ones that are trying to hire the next workforce of the future. And we knew that industry wants to play a role in kind of education, but sometimes they don't know how. And so a book was a great opportunity to engage industry partners and say, here's how you can make an impact in your community. Let's share the stories of your workers locally so that people know what you're building, what you're doing, what you're creating, what you're designing. And we also have had small affinity groups. So if you think about companies, many of them have women's groups, for example, or associations that are focused on a particular community and engaging them. And so many of those, like the Women's Energy Network in Boston, Women's Energy Network in Pittsburgh, for example, or a group called WIRE, or Women in Clean Tech Sustainability, also want to make an impact and make share this book. So we've been able to partner with them as well to get this book into more hands.
Now, is there a responsibility on behalf of employers and organizations in the energy sector to do more to attract, recruit, and retain the next generation of women in energy? And if so, any recommendations on what they should do to support girls and young women?
So yes, I think, Dan mentioned it earlier that 22% of workers in all energy jobs are female. So clearly there's a problem, right? And clearly energy industry plays a role in that problem, from the recruitment side to the retention side for women, right? So I think some of the things that they need to look at are not only just the kind of the safety standards of what's available for women, but also just opportunities for women. Are they recruiting and looking for women? Are they actively connected with their local affinity groups and women-oriented professional organizations? Are they touching schools and libraries and Girl Scout troops? So I think industry has a huge and important role to play in recruiting the next clean energy workforce. I think they know that based on a lot of my conversations with industry partners. They know the problem exists and they're trying to tackle it. The problem is that it's not a one-size-fits solution for everybody, right? How you recruit and retain folks in Massachusetts is going to look significantly different than Arizona or Georgia or other parts of the United States. And as in even compared to Canada, right? Because energy doesn't happen in a vacuum. There are local policies and procedures and things in place. But I think the bottom line is that industry knows they play a role, and I think they're working on it.
What do you think, though, are some of the biggest challenges and barriers to entry for girls and young women in the energy and renewable energy sector specifically?
I think they don't know what careers are available to them. I think that if you ask grown adults today, what are the fastest growing jobs in the energy sector? They don't know what they are, right? And some of them are jobs like wind technicians, solar installers, or operations managers for some of these wind and solar farms. These jobs didn't exist, right? They didn't exist at the scale they do now 20 years ago, let alone 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago. So I think part of it is that you can't be what you can't see, right? I think that's a common phrase that's out there is women and girls need to know what these careers are, and what those salaries are and how they make a difference, right? How powering our planet addresses things like climate change, how it makes a difference for communities in terms of education and family life.
What would you like the short and long-term impact of your work to be? And where can people buy your books?
So I think the irony I always say is I would like to write myself out of a job. I would like to not actually have to write books that only feature women, for example, right? And I would really like to be a point where women in energy or women in STEM careers would be so normalized that they would be in everyday children's books. Unfortunately, one sad stat I will share with you right now is that children's books depict men 3 times as often as they do women, in particular for those in science, technology, engineering, and math, which means the likelihood of a child picking up a book and seeing a woman working in science, technology, engineering, or math, whether that's a real woman or just an illustrated woman, is pretty low, right? And so until we change that media narrative, I'm going to have a job to continue sharing these stories and telling these stories. What I think is so interesting is that there's so many media and ways to share these stories. Now, I'm a traditional children's book author, and I like print books, right? But the world is changing with Instagram and videos, and the way to reach students and kids is much more vast, and there's a wide variety now to reach students. Where can you buy my books? So if you go to stemsuperheroes.com, stemsuperheroes.com is our website. You can find all the places to find the books, but anywhere you want to buy a book, Barnes & Noble, Walmart, Amazon, bookshop.org, all of our books and collections are in those places.
Now, Erin, we always end our interviews with some rapid fire questions. We've got some new ones for you. I hope you're ready.
I think so.
Okay. What are you reading right now?
I knew you were going to ask that. I am reading Amanda Gorman's Call Us What We Carry, which is her collection of poems.
Okay. What would you name your boat if you had one? Do you have one?
I don't have a boat, but I think I would name it Sun, like S-U-N, like the sunshine.
Who is someone that you admire, Erin?
I think right now it would be, who is someone that you admire? I know this is supposed to be rapid fire, but I think she's a historical woman, but I really admire her work. Her name is Eunice Foote with Foote, if you want to go Google her. She was actually one of the first climate scientists. She did the first experiments on greenhouse gases using jars just in her backyard. And I just really admire that she did that experimentation at home. And not only that, but she recorded all those experiments, and she attempted to share those experiments with science foundations and out in the world. So that's just somebody I've been reading about and kind of admire her dedication to doing that work.
Cool. What is the closest thing to real magic that you've witnessed?
Oh, I think plugging in an electric vehicle and having it turn on. I mean, right, as a kid, I'm so used to gasoline and that smell. And I'll be honest, I'm in the process of trying to purchase an electric vehicle, but I feel like that's magic, right? Like that sparks my 10-year-old self of what I'm going to plug in a car and what does that mean and how does that work? And I want to know all of the things, right? And all those connection points. So that's probably the closest magic I've experienced lately.
Erin, what has been the biggest challenge to you personally since the pandemic began?
So I have 2 little kids, and I think in some ways there was isolation that was probably really hard from a family perspective. But on the flip side of that, I got to connect with a lot of classrooms around the world that I would never get to connect with. I visited classrooms in Missouri, in New Jersey, in Arizona, in Korea, in Japan, and I never would have been able to do that, right? Because they're not flying me out to do those visits.
Okay, we've all been watching a lot of Netflix and some of us TV lately. What's your favorite movie or show?
I just finished, it's a docu-series. It's called The Bad Vegan. So it's a real life story. It's about a woman who started one of the most successful vegan restaurants in the United States in the 90s. And then she was convicted of kind of, fraud and not paying workers. But it's a super interesting story. And she actually was caught eating a pizza. And so it's a very interesting kind of, like this whole persona and building a brand. And she developed this brand and it got dismantled. And so that's caught my attention recently.
Lastly, what's exciting you about your industry right now?
I think what's exciting is that we're changing how we're going to power our planet, right? And that impacts all of us, whether you live on a tiny island somewhere to some of the huge industrialized nations in the United States. And I think we have so much opportunity to actually think about how do we want to power our planet? What sources do we want to use to power our planet? And we have a huge opportunity to be a leader in how we change and address climate change.
Well, Erin, that's it. We've reached the end of another episode of the ThinkEnergy podcast. If our listeners want to learn more about you and your work, how could they connect?
The best place would be to go to the website, stemsuperheroes.com. You'll find everything about the work that we do, sharing the stories, careers, and superpowers of women in STEM. You'll find my email address. We're also on all the social handles at STEM Superheroes. So you can find us on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Instagram. We don't have a TikTok, but maybe in the future as, the modes and the media keep changing.
All right. Thank you again, Erin, so much for joining us today. We hope you had a good time.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. And I really appreciate you letting me share a little bit about energy superheroes and the women who are changing our planet.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the ThinkEnergy podcast. And don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review wherever you're listening. And to find out more about today's guest or previous episodes, visit ThinkEnergyPodcast.com. I hope you'll join us again next time as we spark even more conversations about the energy of tomorrow.